Now we're going to focus on the muscular system. The muscular system is going to consist of all the muscles of the body. As we've talked about before, there is smooth muscle, skeletal muscle, and cardiac muscle. Now, skeletal muscle is usually what we think about. What you see in those diagrams there, that's all skeletal muscle, connecting to the bones, helping us move. Now, the skeletal muscle is going to make up about 42% of the total body weight, so that's almost half. And we're going to be talking about how the muscle is going to be composed of different fibers, and we're going to talk about how those fibers move and function. Now, there are over 600 muscles that make up the muscular system. As we said, majority are going to be skeletal. So there's around 650 muscles of the body. And as we covered before, the muscle tissue is found on bones, it's in the intestines and the heart. So that's going to be your skeletal, smooth, and cardiac muscle. The function of the muscle is for movement, stability, posture. It's for digestion and circulation, pumping that blood. Now, we've seen the classification of the three types: the skeletal muscle, the smooth muscle, and the cardiac muscle. Remember, the skeletal muscle is the only voluntary that's going to take conscious thought to move, and it's going to have these lines or striations. Now, the smooth muscle and cardiac muscle are involuntary. We don't have to think about moving them or using them. So I'm so glad we don't have to worry about that. Now, cardiac muscle is like the skeletal muscle in which it has the lines or striations. Smooth muscle does not have those striations, but cardiac muscle not only has the striations, but it has intercalated discs that are these little separations or connection points between each cardiac cell. And as you can see the striations of the skeletal muscle, you can see the striations and intercalated discs of the cardiac muscle, and then you can see no striations in the smooth muscle. Now, the muscular characteristics that you need to know include extensibility, which is focusing on extending or the ability of the muscle to be stretched; contractibility, which is something we're going to talk about in just a little bit, and this is the contraction and relaxation of the muscle fibers, and this is going to be stimulated by the chemical responses of the nerve. So this is going to cause the muscle to stretch out or become short, and this is essentially going to cause movement. Excitability or irritability is basically responding to the stimulus, such as maybe heat or pain, some sort of nerve impulse. And elasticity is allowing the muscle to return to its original shape and position after it was stretched or contracted. Now we're going to break down the structure of the muscle in a very similar way that we did with the bone or the osteon of the bone. So we're going to kind of go a little microscopic. And let's start with the larger portion. We have the connective tissue, which is the tendon. That tendon connects the bone to the muscle. Then we're going to move into the muscle, the whole muscle structure. And there's going to be some terms that you're going to have to write down. And as you can see here, we're starting very large with the muscle, and we're going to go all the way down to the smallest, which is the actin and myosin. And the actin and myosin is what actually does the contraction. As you can see, the little heads on the actin. So you can see the tendon here, and then what wraps and covers the bulk of the muscle is the epimysium. Now the epimysium is a covering. The perimysium is also a covering, but this covering is going to cover each of the fascicles, and the fascicle is a bundle of muscle fibers. And so we have these separate coverings, and over each muscle fiber we have the endomysium. So as you can see here, we already talked about the tendon connects muscle to bone. Then we have the covering of the bulk of the muscle, which is the epimysium. Each little bundle within the epimysium is going to be called a fascicle. These fascicles are covered in perimysium, and then within each fascicle we have muscle fibers, and each muscle fiber is going to be covered with endomysium. Now the endomysium, if we break that down even further, we have something called myofibrils. Myo is generally referring to muscle. Here's the breakdown of the myofibril. The myofibril is covered in another tissue called the sarcolemma, and the myofibrils are then divided into little units called the sarcomere. Now the sarcomere is divided into some different parts, as you can see in the bottom picture. We have the Z disc, the H zone, and we have an I band, an A band, an M line. But we really are only going to focus on the dark A band, the light I band, and then we're going to focus on what's inside those. And you can kind of see on the left and right, it says thin actin filament and thick myosin filament. So that's really what we're going to focus on, are the actin and myosin that's going to cause the contraction of the muscle. When we move our muscles, it all goes back to this microscopic contraction, these tiny little sarcomeres within the myofibril. Here you can see the myosin and the actin. You can see the myosin is stretched out when relaxed, and then with energy and calcium ions, we have the contraction and it becomes shorter. So the myosin becomes shorter, and you can actually see the little heads on the end of the myosin. They actually connect to the actin, pulling the actin. So you can actually see that here. You have the myosin head, and as you have ADP in the phosphate, that will form an energy ATP. That myosin head will pick up and push the actin, and so we have a basic contraction, and then when it lets go, we have a relaxation. And that is primarily caused and initiated by the nerve. Now the nerve is going to release chemical impulses, and those chemical impulses, we said, are chemical. So what's going to create that? And that's a release of calcium ions. And you can actually see the calcium ion coming in, and you can see at the bottom picture, you can see the relaxed and contracted. You can see the myosin head. When it's relaxed, that head is down, but when it's contracted, the head is up, pulling the A band closer, pulling on the actin, pulling on that thin filament of the actin closer together. Now, if you do have any questions about this, I'll upload some videos, and also feel free to email me or ask me questions in class as we review this. Now let's focus on some muscular terms. We have the word origin and insertion. You can see those part on the diagram. Now another name for the origin is called the head, and the head or origin is basically where the muscle attaches to an immovable part. That's the part that's not going to be moving. And so what we have is the insertion. That's the part of the muscle. You can see the lower portion here, okay, that's attaching to the forearm bones, the radius and ulna. And so when you contract, it's not the scapula that gets brought down, but it's the radius and ulna that gets brought up, and you bring your arm or your hand to your chest or head. And with that knowledge, the other terms tie in with different prefixes or identification of different muscles. So we have the number of origins. So if you have a prefix like bi, we said bi or di means 2, tri meaning 3. So a bicep, it's referring to having 2 origins, while the tricep has 3 origins. And remember, the origins are the head attaching to a non-movable part. The shape of the muscle, you're going to see some terms such as deltoid, trapezius, serratus, and orbicularis. Now, deltoid, think about deltoid triangle. Trapezius, a trapezoid shape. Serratus, maybe you remember in biology or life science where serrated means sawtooth, like a sawtooth leaf. And orbit, referring to circular. Now, location, if you have a muscle, in the muscle name, they're actually going to give you different location of the origin or insertion. And you can see that here with sterno and mastoid. And then you have the direction of the muscle. Rectus is referring to parallel. Transverse refers to perpendicular. Oblique referring to a 45-degree angle. Now, you should know what parallel and perpendicular refers to, what a 45-degree angle would look like, if you could think about that in your mind. If not, please look those up or have me explain those to you further, which you should have learned about those in math class. Now, location of muscles, anterior, posterior, dorsal, ventral. We covered those the first week of school, so please make sure you go ahead and refresh your mind on the anatomical positions. And then size. Maximus refers to large, longus refers to long, and then brevis refers to short. So adduction is referring to closing your arms, bring it closer to the midpoint of the midline of the body. And then abduction is moving away. Flexion is decreasing the angle between the two bones or bending a body part. So you're bringing it closer to your arm. You bring your hand closer to your arm. Flexion of your knee, you're bringing it closer to your butt. Okay. Flexion of at your elbow, you're closing it. And flexion of the foot is to bring it closer to your tibia. While extension would be the complete opposite. That's increasing the angle, bringing it somewhat away from. So extension would be if you ever heard the word hyperextension, is you're bringing it too far. That's maybe not natural. So if you bend your knee, okay, up to where it's pretty straight, but then you bend it beyond what it can bend, that's hyperextending it. Your leg, your arm, your foot is going to be away from the bone, increasing the angle. Then we have rotation. Rotation is just a turning around the axis. So we have a hip rotation, maybe even a head rotation, turning it side to side. We already talked about a pivot joint, that's your rotation. Then we have circumduction, is referring to just moving in a circle, which is a specific type of flexion. So dorsiflexion is specifically with the foot, bringing it closer to the tibia, while plantar flexion is bringing it and stretching it out. Now, if you bring it up and out, doing dorsiflexion, plantarflexion can help with shin splints. And this is more of a up and down foot motion. Then we have eversion. This is turning your foot outward, and then inversion, turning your foot inward. Now you are done with the Fitbin, but I went ahead and posted some of the major muscles we're going to talk about and learn. So if you want to start looking at that, start thinking about that, that's going to be our next Fitbin, is to identify a lot of these muscles and the shapes and apply what we're learning in this lecture video to the names and purposes of the muscles.